Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Sallallahu wasallam ala Nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd, we are continuing our study of the work entitled Bulugh al-Maram, entitled Attainment of the Objective, as this work has been authored by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. May Allah, the Exalted, bestow expansive mercy upon his soul. And we have entered into the last section of this particular work entitled Kitab al-Jami', the comprehensive book. And we have also entered into the first chapter of the comprehensive book entitled Babul Adab, the chapter of ethics, or if you like, the chapter of morals and manners. Um, we come today to a new hadith, as the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has stated, or first we should state, وعن ابن مسعود رضي الله عنه قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. And on the authority of Ibn Mas'ud, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, may Allah be pleased with him, as he states that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, إذا كنتم ثلاثة فلا يتناجى اثنان دون الآخر حتى تختلطوا بالناس من أجل إن ذلك يحزنه متفق عليه واللفظ لمسلم. um, when you all are three, then two of you should not enter into private discourse to the exclusion of the other, the third person, until all of the people begin to gather, because this will make him sad. Because this will make him sad. Muttafaqun alayhi. This hadith is agreed upon. Walafdhu li Muslim. And the wordage here is of Muslim. Um, we understand what is taking place here. We have three people. We have three people. Two people begin talking to one another and excluding the third person in a way that the third person doesn't know what they're talking about. That's what the hadith is discussing. And that this is something that is prohibited because it will cause that other person, the third person, to experience huzn, to become sad. We mentioned last week that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, one of the not only senior companions, not only amongst those who embraced Islam very early on, but also one of the greater scholars of the companions. We mentioned that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud passes in what year? May Allah bless you all. Who recalls? The year 32 after the Hijrah. 32 years after the immigration of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam into the prophetic city of Al-Medina. This hadith is muttafaqun alayhi. It is agreed upon. And when we hear this phraseology, this terminology, muttafaqun alayhi, or agreed upon, this means what? And we'll hear hadith scholars utilizing this language, or other scholars that are utilizing hadith language use this language. Muttafaqun alayhi. The hadith is agreed upon. What does that mean? True. Which ones? Good. And that's one. Al-Bukhari. Bukhari and Muslim. There you go. We're stating that Al-Bukhari and Muslim have both collected this hadith in their collections of hadith. And when we find this hadith in both of their collections, it may be the same exact wordage in both collections, or the meaning of both will be the same. Either scenario is still considered muttafaqun alayhi, or a hadith that is agreed upon. In this case, وَاللَّفْظُ لِمُسْلِمٍ, and the wordage is of Muslim, meaning that this particular wordage of this hadith, will find it with this wordage in Sahih Muslim, but we'll also find a hadith recorded in Al-Bukhari with a different wording, but the same meaning. Now, moving on to the meaning of what is being stated here, The prohibition, فَلَا يَتَنَاجَى إِثْنَانِ. So two people should not enter into private discourse, meaning that two people should not enter into a form of discussion where one person is seeking direction and counsel from the other, or one person is sharing a secret with the other. Either way, right? Maybe it's a secret, or maybe a person is seeking some form of direction. Either way, if there are three parties present, two of them should not do this. The prohibition here is in the scenario specifically when there are three people. When there are three people. And if there are more than three people, does the prohibition remain? If there are more than three people, does the prohibition remain? We understand what the prohibition is, yes? If there are more than three, let's say there are four, does this prohibition still stand? Yes, 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 no. Okay, good. So in the text of the hadith, it states, إِذَا kuntum thalathatin, when you all are three. The Messenger of Allah ﷺ states that specifically. Okay? And this is important because when we are examining the text of the Quran and the Sunnah, there is something that is called an illah. There's something that is called the reason for the ruling, or the justification for the reason for the ruling. And it is that justification being present that allows the ruling to apply. Without that justification being present, the rule no longer applies. Or the hukum, right? The judgment, the verdict no longer applies. Okay? And this concept is something that we should be aware of when we're interacting with the text. We shouldn't only look at what the text is saying. Inside of the text, we should be looking for the illah, the justification for the ruling as well. Okay? Because this allows us to understand when a hukum applies, when a ruling applies, and when it doesn't. And it also allows us to understand the reason behind the ruling. Okay? So we look for this. And if we understand this, we can look at the illah, the justification for a ruling, separate from the ruling itself, and extract other than it from it. Okay? That's one. Two, this also becomes very important. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. This also becomes very important when we are discussing the topic of qiyas, when we're discussing the topic of analogy. And we know this is primarily a hadith discussion, but we need to understand how this works, because this is something that we need in order to extract from hadith. So there are four primary evidences that we have in Islam that scholarship broadly has agreed upon, and most of scholarship might even say that there is an ijma' on these four. Okay, but definitely we can say scholarship broadly has agreed. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, has agreed upon these four. Okay, the difference between agreeance and consensus. When you hear the term they've agreed upon it, and we're talking fiqh law, then this means the majority of scholarship, jumhur. Okay, ittifaq. This means jumhur, the majority of scholarship. If you hear ijma', consensus, this means all of scholarship has agreed upon this, and or all of scholarship that their views are considered on this issue have agreed upon it. Okay, but in any regard, in qiyas, in analogy, there are four things you need to have. Okay, you need to have a text. You need to have a text. You need to have a thing that you are weighing the analogy against. Three, and this is in no particular order. Three, you need to have an illah, which is why we're having this discussion, a reason for the ruling, a justification for the ruling that's inside of that text. And four, you need a hukum. You need a verdict. Can't perform qiyas without these four. You need a text, which you're weighing the text against. You need a justification for the ruling, and you need a ruling. Okay? Um, and we'll take just a very brief example. We are familiar of the issue of wiping over the khifaf, wiping over the khuf, right? Okay. When the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam wiped over his khuf, what material was he wiping over? Leather socks, right? So then how are you wiping over cotton, or maybe polyester if you're slick, right? When the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam wiped over leather, right? It's qiyas, it's analogy. We look at the text where the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is wiping over the leather socks. And then we look at how similar the socks we wear are to the type and the function of the socks the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was wearing. So then we take the text about the leather sock and then we levy it over to the cotton sock. That's qiyas. Okay, that's analogy. And that is an evidence in Islam. We have Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', Qiyas. We have Quran, Sunnah, consensus, and then analogy. These are the four primary evidences we have in Islam. There are others outside of these, but the majority of scholarship has agreed upon these four. The point of our discussion, though, is understanding the concept of what an illah is. So just like the leather sock, its function is to cover and protect the foot. That's its function, right? Okay, good. So what does your cotton sock do? It covers and protects the foot, right? So then this is similar to that. So then we levy the ruling of this over to that. And the reason is the same, right? We're wiping over the sock in order to facilitate our state of purification. So the justification for the ruling is there too, right? That's qiyas, okay? And that's what an illah is, a justification or reason for a ruling. Yes, sir. No, no, sir. No, in fact,
Leather is different from cotton, 100%. You know, leather comes from an animal and is somewhat waterproof. Leather is not real pure waterproof, but it's somewhat waterproof. It's close to waterproof, but cotton is not waterproof at all.
well, goes back to the illah, right? The reason why he was wiping over the socks, right? Not necessarily the sock itself, right? But no, this is not something that modern day scholarship has come up with, the idea of qiyas. In fact, when the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is sending Mu'adh to Yemen, when he's sending Mu'adh to Yemen, right? Outside of the famous narration that we're aware of that comes on the authority of Ibn Abbas, right? There's another narration where he's sending him to Yemen and he is speaking to him as a faqih and as a judge, as a jurist and as a judge. And he states, what will you rule with when you are there? He says the Quran. What if you cannot find the ruling in the Quran? Mu'adh tells him the Sunnah. And what if you don't find it in the Sunnah? He states that he will make qiyas. And the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he'll make analogy. And the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, you know, when you tap someone to say you gotten it right, you're doing good, the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did to him in that case. But in any regard, we don't want to get off track. The point here and the focus is the concept of an illah, because it's getting ready to come up again. Inshallah, we understand the concept. So he states here, Sana'ani rahimahullah, he states here that within this hadith, there's a prohibition of two individuals entering into private discourse with one another when there's a third party present. And if there are more than three, then the ruling no longer applies because the illah that is found inside of the text is no longer present. Because the justification for the ruling that is found inside of the text is no longer present. Because he stated explicitly when you are three, right? Okay. Now, as for looking further into the illah, looking further into the justification here, it is that because he states it, so that the person doesn't become sad, right? This is the reason for it in this case, so the person doesn't become sad. And this sadness can come from being isolated, right? When you feel like you're being pushed out, you don't understand, right, what it is that may be taking place. Maybe the person may feel, well, maybe I'm not worthy of hearing the secret, right? You make me feel like I'm not good enough, right? I'm not good enough for y'all, right? Or maybe the person, and we experience this all the time. If you see two people start to talk off to the side somewhere, what's your first thought? They talking about you, right? More often than not, it's not true. Sometimes it is, right? But more often than not, it's not true. But to not make the person go through these different emotions and right psychological processes, just don't just don't do it. Is what the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is stating here. Further, uh, the illah, the justification for the ruling here is indicative that if there are four, then there is no prohibition on two individuals entering into private discourse with one another لِفَقْدِ الْعِلَّةِ, due to the fact that the illah is no longer present. The justification for the ruling no longer applies. And what is apparent here is that this text is general for all scenarios, whether people are traveling or whether people are in their residential areas. And this view that this text is general and applies to all scenarios. This is the view of Ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Umar, as well as Malik and the majority of scholarship. And there are some that claim that this text has been abrogated. San'ani states, however, there's no evidence for that. San'ani's view, there's no evidence for that. And the statement here that this is the view of Ibn Umar, meaning Abdullah ibn Umar, and Malik is significant in that um, who is Malik's main teacher? Who is Malik's primary teacher? Nafi'. Nafi', right? Nafi', who was, interestingly enough, an individual who was once enslaved, um, and he achieved his freedom by way of being freed by Abdullah bin Umar. By Abdullah bin Umar, okay? But he remained with Abdullah bin Umar and absorbed knowledge from him until he enters into scholarship. Okay, and for what it's worth, Nafi' is said to be one of darker hue, and there are some that state that he is of African descent. For what it is worth. Okay, now the understanding here, though, is that uh, Malik's primary teacher, Malik ibn Anas, passes in 179 after the Hijrah. His primary teacher, Imam al-Dar al-Hijrah, right, the main scholar of Medina during his time, he learned from Nafi' as a primary teacher, and Nafi' learns from Abdullah ibn Umar. Okay? So we learn from this just knowing that connection, two things: a hadith benefit and a fiqh benefit. When you say a hadith is sahih, one of the highest qualities of a sahih hadith, of a sound hadith that we have, is a hadith that in the chain, Malik on Nafi' on Ibn Umar. It's called the golden chain, a golden synod. So it's not just sound, it's amongst the highest level of authority in its soundness, hadith benefit. In fiqh, the Maliki madhab in its origin goes back to Abdullah ibn Umar. Abdullah ibn Umar, okay? Um, and all of the madhahib, the four primary madhahib, I should state, in their origin, they actually go back to the Sahaba. All right, all four of the madhahib in their origin go back to the Sahaba, and of course, the Sahaba are learning and conveying from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Moving forward, as for the verses that come in the chapter Al-Mujadila, then within them we find a prohibition of the Jews entering into this private discourse, as has been collected by a reporter by Ibn Mundhir and other than him on Mujahid concerning his statement of the exalted. Mujahid is a primary tabi'i scholar from the second generation, the successors, and Mujahid amongst the tabi'un, his statement carries weight on that level, on that generational level concerning the tafsir of the Quran. He's a scholar outside of tafsir, but when you're looking into tafsir and you get to the point where you've exhausted the statements of the companions and you're looking for the tabi'un now and what they say about the verse, one of the main names you're looking for to see what they say, Mujahid. Mujahid. And in the regard, he states concerning his statement of the exalted, Alam tara illadhina nuhu an najwa, as come in the chapter Mujadida, verse number 8. Have you not seen those who were prohibited from najwa, who were prohibited from entering into private discourse? He states al Yahud. This is speaking to those of Jewish faith, of course, those residing in Medina at the time. And Ibn Abi Hatim, he reports on Muqatil ibn Hayyan that he states that there was between those of Jewish faith, and the Prophet ﷺ a truce, a truce, and we know there was an understanding that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ had with the non-Muslims in Medina, and amongst those non-Muslims were those of Jewish faith. Okay, the details of which we've discussed in the Sirah of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. But there was a truce between them. There's an understanding, meaning there is a political agreement that we are going to live and function in this society together without bringing harm to each other. Okay. Um, Yet, when one of the companions would pass by some of those of Jewish faith, you're out and about, you see people doing what they're doing. They would see some of those of Jewish faith that would be congregating, right, with one another, and they will be congregating in such a way that it will make a person of iman, that will make a believer think that they were congregating and speaking in private like this in order to conspire to kill the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or in order to do something that a believer would not be comfortable with, that a believer would dislike. Okay, and we can see this sometimes when people are gathering a certain way. We know people and kind of what they do, right? We can kind of tell sometimes, maybe not all the time. Right? We're not saying necessarily to begin profiling people, but sometimes when people are gathering a certain way, you can get a feel when people are kind of up to no good, right? Okay. So this was something that was going on. And of course, we can now look in hindsight, right? We have the history now to prove that, in fact, those of Jewish faith, the three tribes of those of Jewish faith, that they, in fact, were conspiring to do things against the Messenger of Allah, sallam, Islam, and the Muslims. So when a believer, when a believer, the companions would see this would be something that would cause him to become bothered and become fearful for the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibits them from gathering and congregating in this way. So Allah then reveals, Alam tara ila ladhina nuhu an najwa. Have you not seen those that have been prohibited from gathering in private discourse? Next hadith. And on the authority, وعن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, and on the authority of Abdullah ibn Umar, may Allah be pleased with him and his father, as he states that the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم has said, لا يقيم الرجل من مجلسه ثم يجلس فيه ولكن تفسحوا وتوسعوا متفق عليه. On the authority of Ibn Umar, of course this is Abdullah ibn Umar, may Allah be pleased with him and his father, as he says that the Messenger of Allah has said, a man should not stand up and then another man sits in his place. A person should not get up and then another person sits in that person's place. However, you all should make it wide and comfortable. You all should make it wide and comfortable. Hadith muttafaqun alayhi, hadith agreed upon. Ibn Umar, his first name is what? We just stated it. Ibn Umar, first name is what? We'll do this with some of the companions, at least some of the more prominent, well-known companions, because we should be familiar with some of the greater companions. Ibn Umar, his name is what? Abdullah. Good. And may Allah bless you all as well. Who passed in what year? Who passed in what year? Now understand. Say it again. 32. Good. That's Ibn Mas'ud. So 32 plus 40. Good. In the year 72, the year 72 after the Hijrah, and Allah knows best. The understanding here, what is taking place, is that sometimes in our gatherings, people sit and they don't make the gathering comfortable for other people to come and sit. You ever come into a gathering and you got to kind of find a place where you can stand or sit, or a place where you can be, right? Okay. In Islam, what we should be doing is making it comfortable for others, make room for them, right? And it shouldn't be that you're sitting waiting for somebody to get up and then you take their place. It shouldn't be like that, okay? Um, but rather you should make it wide and make it comfortable, make space for people, right? It's what's being stated here. Now, what is apparent from this hadith is a tahrim. What is apparent from this hadith is that this is something that is haram. This is something that is unlawful. And whoever leaves a place, and the place that this person is in is a place that is mubah, that is permissible or neutral for that person to be in, like a masjid, or other than that, a place where a person is praying, or a place where a person is performing acts of obedience. It's a place permissible to be in that place. And that person gets up and leaves from that place, then that person he has more right to that place. That person has more right to that place, right? How do you feel, right? You get up and you leave for a minute, and then you come back and somebody's in your seat, right? No, that person has more right to that place because they were there. So then it is prohibited for other than him to take his place. And we have in another hadith, من قام من مجلسه ثم رجع إليه ثم رجع إليه فهو حق به. Whoever stands up from his sitting, from his place, ثم رجع إليه, and then he returns back to it, فهو أحق به, then he has more right to it. This is collected by Muslim. That's pretty straightforward in that particular scenario. If a person gets up because they have some need, they're praying in this place or they're doing something else, right? They get up due to some need that the person has, and then they return back, and someone else is sitting in that person's place, then this person has a right to say, I was in that place. Can you get up from my place, please? That person has more right to that place and can express that if that person so chooses to do so. And this is the view of the Shafi'i madhab and other than them as well. As they state, there is no difference here whether it is the masjid where the person has their seat, and maybe the person leaves something there, leaves a sajada, leaves a prayer rug there, or maybe the person doesn't, or maybe the person leaves something else there. A person might leave a hat there, leave a book there, a coat there, right? Just as a marker, this is my spot. Then in this instance, this person is فَإِنَّهُ حَقُّ بِهِ, this person has more right to that particular place. And they say, that he has a right to that place in that particular prayer, to the exclusion of other prayers. To the exclusion of other prayers, but that particular prayer. Okay, this is the view of the Shafi'i madhab and others as well. And this is interesting. I don't know if you all have witnessed this, but this is something that you'll see. You'll see it in masajid in Eastern countries and such, where you go to the masjid, and in the front there are chairs that are set up and rugs that are just there, but you don't see anybody there, right? And it is always an older gentleman who's been coming to the masjid for a very long time. That's his spot. You don't go over there. You don't sit right there. You don't pray right there. You find something else, right? In the Shafi'i madhab, and others in scholarship as well, they're saying no, one salat. You can do that for one salat. You can't do that indefinitely. Okay, that's their view. Now, this hadith also encompasses an individual that takes a specific place in order to do commerce. There are people that they have a particular place where they're doing commerce, right? This is particular to this may be in some form of street vending. This may be in a flea market, right? It may even be in a mall. It may be, right? There's a particular place for this particular person to do business, or it's a place where this person does this function all the time. Maybe that's the spot where this person works out. You know, that's their workout spot. You know that, right? And this can work in a more finite scenario as well, meaning inside of our homes. Inside of our homes, there are certain places where certain people do certain things, and you know that's where that person does that certain thing, right? And you know it's a thing. You go mess up their stuff or you do something there, right? It can become a thing, right? Okay. This happens when you live with people. But in any regard, I apologize. Um, in any regard, and moving forward, these are examples. Now, this also does include when an individual has a place in the masjid where this person normally teaches that inside of the masjid continually, then this person has more right to that particular place to perform that particular function. Um, Al Mahdi, he states, ila al ashi, until the end of the day, until nighttime. Okay. Al Ghazali, rahimahullah, he states, ila al abad, this is forever, right? Forever. So long as this person has not been officially removed from that post, and you know this is where that person teaches, that is that person's seat. That's that person's spot where that person teaches, and it is not for others to do so. As for if a person is sitting and a person gets up from their space for some other reason, right? They're not returning back to that particular place, or the person is getting up to make room for somebody else, then this is permissible for this person to do that. And it has been reported on Ibn Umar, may Allah be pleased with him and his father, that he would stand up, or that a person would stand up from his place, so that other than him could sit in that particular place. And it is understood that a person would do this out of piety, right? Meaning, a person may say, outside of this discussion of rights, the individual is that individual's right to that particular place. Out of piety, this individual may feel, well, this person is more needed of this space than I am. This person is more worthy than I am. Well, who am I? And a person may get out of that particular space, right? And we come across this in the prayer line at times, right? In the prayer line, we come across this type of a scenario, particularly in the first rank of the prayer. It happens in other ranks, particularly in the first rank of the prayer, where a person may have made the first rank, in the virtue in the first rank, but then someone else that person respects, or a person of virtue, comes, and that person may want to stand back in order to give the other person their space, right? Their space. However, we would submit that it is a discussion among scholarship, because of all of the virtues of prayer, and being in the first rank, and being to the prayer early, and all of these types of matters. Scholarship deduces from this an observation. And scholarship states, if you want to know your rank in paradise, look to how close you are to the imam in prayer. Where do you fall in the rank? You follow? So then, in understanding that, a person may not be so quick to give up, right, their space. But normally, even in that instance, the people can still take a half a step or a part of a step, and a few of them do that, and there's still space for another person anyway, and everyone can share inside of the rank. Our last hadith for the day. وعن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. And on the authority of Ibn Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him and his father, as he says that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, إذا أكل أحدكم طعاما, when one of you is eating food, فلا يمسح يده حتى يلعقها أو يلعقها متفق عليه. When one of you is eating food, then he should not wipe his hands, wipe your hands off, until he has licked them, or until he has licked, well, we'll translate directly, until he has licked it, or it has been licked. Until he has licked it, or it has been licked. Okay? Um, First point of mention, because we want to be inclusive here. We mentioned that the form of madhahib actually go back to the Sahaba. Actually go back to the Sahaba. Okay? Um, Ahmed ibn Hanbal, his primary teacher is who? Shafi'i. Shafi'i. Muhammad ibn Idris, a Shafi'i. Okay? His primary teacher. Um, Now, of course, we're familiar with the Shafi'i madhab. Shafi'i's primary teacher is who? Malik. Malik ibn Anas. Okay? So the three of them go back through the same chain. Of course, they have other teachers, but Ahmed learned from Shafi'i. Shafi'i learned from Malik. Malik learned from Nafi'. And Nafi' learned from Abdullah ibn Umar. So those three madhahib go back to Abdullah ibn Umar. Okay? Then we have the madhab of Abu Hanifa, the Hanafi madhab. And if we trace back through his teachers, eventually we will get to a Sahabi who is, huh? It isn't Abdullah. Which one? Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Right? Because Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he eventually settles out in Persia. And Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is one of the primary teachers of the Persians. Okay? So Abu Hanifa, his madhab goes back to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. And Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he says about himself that he modeled his approach to law on who? Umar ibn Khattab. Umar ibn Khattab. Okay? Which is interesting when you see the kind of views that are taken in the way that the law is approached. Goes back to these Sahaba. Okay? Goes back to these Sahaba. Okay. This hadith comes on the authority of Abdullah ibn Abbas. Review. Abdullah ibn Abbas passes in what year? Rahimahullah. May Allah have mercy upon the soul. May Allah be pleased with him and his father. This is a review question. We stated this one before. 68. Right? 68 after the Hijrah. Because we stated that Ibn Kathir, he says in the introduction to his tafsir that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud passes in the year 32, and Ibn Abbas passes 36 years after that. 32 plus 36 brings us to 68. Ibn Abbas passes in the year 68. So Abdullah ibn Umar, 72, Ibn Abbas, 68. We see that they're further down the line in their passing because they were the younger Sahaba. So they lived longer, right? Okay. And in the regard, and then moving forward. This hadith, it is indicative that it is not necessarily specifically incumbent upon the individual to wash one's hands from food. To wash one's hands from food. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ states, one should not wipe off his hand before he has. So this indicates to us that wiping off the hand can be allowable. Okay? All this being stated, though, we do have a hadith that comes in the Sunan of Abu Dawood, in which the Messenger of Allah ﷺ would wash his hands before he ate and after he ate. Right? Before he ate and after he ate, he would do so. However, he's stating here clearly that it's sufficient, though, to wipe the hands. In this is an evidence that would indicate an obligation of licking the hand. By licking the hand, of course, we mean licking the fingers. Or other than that person licking the hand or licking the fingers. Now, what is the illah behind this? What is the reason for this ruling? Right? The ruling here is you shouldn't wipe your hands off until you've licked your fingers or had them licked, going that far. If you didn't lick your fingers, somebody should have licked your fingers before you wipe your hands off. What's the reason for that? What's the illah? Sometimes the illah is explicitly stated in the text, and sometimes it's not explicitly stated, but it's understood from the text. What will be the reason for that? Why lick? Why lick the fingers? It'll spread what's on your hand if you didn't lick it. Think about what else we know from the sunnah about the etiquette of eating and what we're looking to get from our eating, yes? It's the barakah. Exactly right. Right? We know there are hadith about the barakah in the food that we eat, right? To the extent, as San'ani is going to mention soon, that we know the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has ordered us to seek the blessing in what we eat and not to waste the food, to the extent that even in licking the fingers or licking the plate, just to get the barakah that is there, and the understanding in getting that barakah is to utilize that blessing in order to help us upon the obedience of Allah. We need the blessing in the food so that we can obey Allah more and obey Allah better. Right? This is the spiritual understanding in the food, in our eating. We're not just eating just because we're hungry or because it tastes good. Do that, right? But you also want the blessing that is there, because the blessing that is in the food will help you to be in a state to obey Allah more and worship Allah better. Okay? All right. So he has stated, certainly you all do not know. Innukum latadruna fi ayi ta'amikum al-baraka. Certainly you all do not know where the blessing is in your food. Is it in the part that's close to you? Is it in the part that's further away from you? Is it in the middle? Is it on the side? So now, in order for you to get the barakah, because you know what's in there, but you don't know where it is. So now, what are you encouraged to do? Eat all of the food, or at least not waste it. Right? Okay. Uh, Likewise, we have in the Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that with this understanding, with the barakah that's in the food, that if there's a morsel of food that falls to the ground, the Sunnah is pick it up and, well, before you eat it, you done brought your childhood culture, you hold up to the sky, you kiss it. No. All right, so sunnah is, if there's a morsel of food that falls to the ground, that you pick the food up, you inspect it. If you're able to remove something harmful from it, you do so, and then continue to eat it. This far, in order to make sure that you don't miss the blessing that's inside of the food. That's why that's there. Right? That's why that's there. Okay? All right. So there's something to the 5-second rule. Right? It's something to that. Okay? All right. So in a wordage of a hadith that comes in the Sahih of Muslim, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam states, if a morsel of the food of one of you falls to the ground, then you should pick it up, and if there's any adha, if there's anything harmful there, you should remove it, and then you should eat it. وَلَا يَدْعُهَا لِلشَّيْطَانِ. And one should not leave the food for shaitan. One should not leave the food there for Satan. Okay, so now that's another issue that's there. Don't leave it for shaitan, right? The barakah is there for the servants of Allah. Don't leave the barakah there for shaitan, right? Okay. Now, what is apparent from the text here is that this seems to be an order of obligation, because the origin with the commandment, when there's a commandment in the text to do something, the origin is wujub, origin is obligation. However, we can understand this here to be istihbab. We can understand this here to be an encouragement, because broadly what is discussed in the subject matter of the etiquette of eating, most of that is going to be mustahab. right? Most of it is mustahab, right? It's something that's optimal, it's encouraged, but it's not necessarily wajib. This is similar to that. But Abu Muhammad ibn Hazm, who is of the Zahiri school of law, the Zahiri approach to law, where they look to not utilize qiyas in the same way that we do, not utilize analogy in the same way that we do, even though they don't negate it in totality. And they want to take directly from the text and what is apparent from the text. Okay, so he's of the view that it's followed. He's of the view that it is obligatory. As for the term barakah, as for the term blessing, well, the word barakah, the word blessing, it comes from a word that means to grow, right? Or to increase, to become more. This is the idea when we say something is blessed or you want to bless it from Allah. When Allah blesses what you have, then what you have, it grows and becomes more, right? It becomes better. This is the understanding of it. Also, thubut al khair, that the good is established. The good is firmly rooted, is firmly fixed. Okay, so barakah, whatever the thing is, becomes firmly fixed, and it grows and becomes more. Now, the intent here as well, though, with this food that is on the fingers of the individual, is that there may be nutrition that is present inside of the food that you can utilize in order to strengthen you so that you can obey Allah with the nutrition from that food. This is one of the reasons why we want to be healthy and we want to eat and we want to gain nutrition from the food so that we can have the strength to obey Allah more. This is a part of our intention in eating, to gain strength to obey Allah with that strength. Now, returning back to the concept of barakah, it is possible that the barakah that we're seeking is in the remaining food that's on the fingers. Hitherto, we're ordered to lick it, or the food that has fallen to the ground, to inspect it and eat it if possible. And the reason for this, the illah, the justification for this, outside of the issue of barakah, is not leaving it for shaitan. So now we have two justifications for the ruling here: seeking the barakah, making sure you get it, and also not leaving it for Satan. The intent by the word hand here, of course, is the fingers, particularly though the three fingers. Which three fingers would the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam most commonly, most frequently eat with most? Which three? These three. That's correct. These are the three fingers that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was eating with the most. And of course, we know he would primarily eat with his hand. Okay. There are those among scholarship that would extend this based on qiyas to using utensils, because if you're using utensils and you're using the utensil properly, what fingers are you using to eat with the utensil? Still the same three, right? So this or that, you're still using these three. Okay. Um, Now, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam generally would not increase using 4 or using 5 fingers unless he had a need to do so. If the food wasn't fully solid or together, right, you may need more fingers, right? Or based on the size of the food or what you're picking up, you may need more fingers, or you may even need your other hand. Possible. But the origin is these three, and then you increase upon that, premised upon your need. It has been collected by Sa'id ibn Mansur, or reported by Sa'id ibn Mansur, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would eat with 5. Would eat with 5. Okay, would eat with 5. However, this hadith is mursal. However, this hadith is considered mursal. We said before there are many more types of hadith than just Sahih, Hasan, Da'if. Another form of a hadith is a hadith that is mursal. A mursal hadith, it is a hadith in the chain of transmission where the sahabi is omitted, where the companion is omitted. So you have a tabi'i, a successor, second generation, reporting directly on the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay. And um, did a tabi'i meet the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? No. Did he see him or hear from him? No. So then, because of that, the origin of such a hadith is that it is da'if, unless it's fragile, unless there are other supporting narrators, right? Other supporting hadith that come to support this, or if we know of the credibility of this individual, and we know the historicity of this individual, insofar that we know this person would never do that, except that there is a person that he took from on the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? We know of this individual, he would function that particular way. And just out of brevity, right? He may just mention the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said this or did this, right? But we know really he has his men, right? He has his men, for example, right? And there are other things to discuss concerning Mursal that we won't discuss. We just would need to know what it is, all right? A tabi'i reports directly on the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is considered a gap in the chain. And the origin with it is that it is da'if, it is fragile or weak, unless there are other supporting narrators, or a reason for us to believe, even though he didn't report the Sahabi, there is a Sahabi that is there. Okay. There's also something else called Mursal Khafi, lightly, lightly Mursal, lightly sprinkled Mursal, right? And this occurs with the Sahaba. You may have a Sahabi who reports on the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam without stating the Sahabi that he learned it from. Okay, and this happens, for example, with times with the younger companions. Many of the ahadith of Ibn Abbas, because we were reporting on him, many of the ahadith of Ibn Abbas at times are ahadith that are mursal khafi. Happens with Aisha as well at times. Why? Because they were younger. So we may find reports on Ibn Abbas speaking about something that took place in Mecca. How did he know? He's a kid, right? No, but they were seeking knowledge and they learned from the other Sahaba as well, right? So then they will report what they learned. And in Hadith, in the field of Hadith, the understanding is that kullu Sahaba udul, that all the Sahaba are credible, right? They all have credit. They're all credible. Why? Because Allah states that radiyallahu anhum wa radu an. Allah is pleased with them and they are pleased with Him. So how can we not be pleased with those that Allah is pleased with? So in Hadith narrating Sahaba, if we get it back to a Sahabi, sufficient. It's sufficient. Okay. Now, moving forward, as we come closer to a close for today. Within this hadith, there's an indicator that there is not a problem with someone else licking the fingers of the individual, licking food off the fingers of the individual, be it the spouse of the individual or perhaps a child of the individual, was stated because it's here, or a servant of the individual. And this is interesting for a couple of reasons. And one, we see how far this is going to not miss out on the blessing that is in the food. Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah, may Allah bestow mercy upon his soul, he passes in 751 after the Hijrah. He mentions here that when there are two people that they are eating from the same plate or they're drinking from the same vessel, what becomes inevitable at some point is that the fluids may mix, right? The saliva and the fluids may mix on some level. So then when that occurs, then by default, there is some of you that is inside of me, and there is some of me that's inside of you. So if I have some of you inside of me, and we have mixed this way, how can I have hatred for you when you are part of me and I'm a part of you? If I don't like you, now I don't like myself, right? As an encouragement of fellowship and brotherhood, right? And just as a fun anecdote before we close, a group of us, are students of Sheikh Salim ibn Sa'ad al-Tawil rahimahullah, or Hafidhahullah, from the Mashaykh of Kuwait, and he was touring the U.S. This is over a decade ago, right? And we were, wherever we were at, I think we may have been in Chicago, where the Sheikh was at that time. And we were in the hotel room, right? The Sheikh was where he was. We were in the hotel room. I believe this would have been maybe 2010 or so, '09 or 10. I think 10 though, right? So we're in a hotel room, right? And we start speaking about this hadith, and we start speaking about Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah and Ibn al-Qayyim's statement, right? And we're eating. It's after Isha, after the lessons. We're all there, right? So then one of the brothers, he takes his hand, right, we won't say names, he takes his hand and he lifts it up like this, he just leaves it there. So which one of y'all gonna lick my fingers, brothers? Right? So it was a conversation, right? It was a conversation that took place. But in any regard, and in moving forward as it comes closer to a close, um, if it is the case that you drop food upon the ground and you look at it, or it's not possible to remove the harm that's in the food, right? Maybe some dirt there or whatever it is, some lint there, and you can't quite get it off, and you don't want to eat something like that, then what scholarship mentions is that even in that scenario, in order to apply the hadith, that you should not leave it for shaitan, then you should find animals to feed it to them. If you're not going to eat it and no one else is going to eat it, then at least feed it to animals. Okay? And Nawawi rahimahullah, he cites that it is permissible to feed food to animals that humans wouldn't necessarily eat it in that state. That it's permissible to do that, right? And in the West, people commonly do that. People do that with their dogs, right? You get the scraps of the dogs, or something fell on the ground, and give it to the dogs, whatever it is. People do that, right? So you do that with animals. In order to apply this hadith, don't leave it for shaitan. And depending on what type of food it is, you may, in what's common for us, you may leave some of it for the birds, for example. Stale bread, right? For example, you may leave some of it for the birds, or something of that nature. As-San'ani rahimahullah, he says there is an ijma' upon this. There's a consensus that it is allowable to give such food to the animals this far, to not lose the blessing that's inside of the food and to not leave any of it for shaitan. But in this modern state of society that we're in, may Allah help us, right? We do what we can, but Allahumma musta'an, right? We're very far away from truly practicing this, right? It's actually stated, and Allah knows best, but it's actually stated that based on the food that we waste alone in America, that is enough to end world hunger. The stuff we just throw away all the time, right? That alone by itself. So how far are we from really practicing this particular hadith? May Allah help us. In our next sitting, inshallah ta'ala, we have a hadith that comes on the authority of Abu Hurairah. May Allah be pleased with him, as he states that the Messenger of Allah has stated, where he stated that the younger should convey salam to the older, and those walking past should convey salam to those that are sitting, and the smaller group should convey the salam to the larger group. Hadith is agreed upon, and in the narration, the one that is riding should give salam to the one that is walking. Now we're going to go back into the etiquette of conveying the salam. We'll do this next week, inshallah ta'ala. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله على محمد. Questions? Go ahead.
Is there a hadith about not like saving the spot, like on Jumu'ah? Did I misunderstand?
Is there a hadith about not saving a spot on Jumu'ah?
Like you shouldn't do that.
There's a hadith from the etiquette of Jumu'ah that a person should not cut between two people that are already sitting, right? Without there being like a need to do so, right? There's that. No. Questions? Sheikh. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
He wore sandals, right?
Yes.
Now, was the sandals the ones they have in Saudi today? Because Saudi have a particular style.
I don't know. So we have descriptions, but not to the degree that we can say it was in this particular cut or style. We knew he wore sandals, and the type of sandals he wore had straps on them. Right? They had straps on them. You know how it straps the foot? There were straps on them. But beyond that, Allah knows best.
Did he
We don't have that. We don't have that in the text. So we don't know. We know he wore sandals. We know the sandals had straps on them. Um, we don't have any more detail than that.
Okay. Okay, two Yahudis talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So who go over there to break them up and tell them that you cannot communicate like that?
Mm-hmm.
Who does that?
Well, in this instance, it was the verse in Surah Al-Mujadila being revealed and them becoming aware of it. So in this instance, Allah did it. So once they became aware of the verse, they have to disperse. They can't congregate that type of way.
Well, so the Jews knew of the verses in the Quran at that time?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
so but they're Jews. They may say, I don't have to go by that. So will a brother come up to them and say, you guys can't talk to each other, you can't communicate?
You would think that would have been the case, but the issue is you're right. They say that's not our legislation. However, they made an agreement with the Messenger of Allah sallallahu to follow the laws of his society. So because of that, they're still bound, right? And Allah knows best.
And just one,
Go ahead.
a whole lot of Muslims, particularly the Arabs, they eat with their fingers.
Mm-hmm.
In today's world, a whole lot of them got a Bible.
May Allah protect us.
And when you, particularly Americans like myself,
Right.
you eat with them with your hand, right?